For my project, I'm using Sallie Tomato zippers by the yard. What makes these zippers unique is they have a nylon coil with a metallic finish. So they appear to be metal, but they're actually not. So it's safe to cut and sew over the actual zipper coil. We sell them by the yard. There's lots of tutorials on YouTube how to use zippers by the yard. I've already went ahead and prepared all of my zippers for this project. I've matched the zipper tape color to the material that I'm using. I'm using Pro Light cork fabric. This is a new material from Sallie Tomato. Traditionally, cork fabric has a thicker backing on it, and we've developed a very thin woven backing. So by using this material, we can make entire bags out of cork, and it won't add any more bulk to our seams than cotton or canvas would. You can make the bag out of traditional Pro cork fabric, but it is going to be a little bit more challenging. So I'd recommend to try out the Pro Light cork. So like I said, I'm going to make the entire project out of cork, and it's not going to add any bulk to our seams, and we're going to be able to turn it right side out. So the first step in the instructions is to prepare the main zipper. The main zipper will go on the top edge of our bag and will give you access to the lining. You'll want to cut a piece of zipper that is 7.5 inches long. I've already marked the finished size of the zipper, which is 6.5 inches. Just make sure that your zipper pull is in between those 6.5 inch marks. And if you'd like, you can do some top stitching back and forth over those 6.5 inch lines so that way your zipper pull doesn't come off. But as long as you don't move your zipper pull, you won't have to worry about that because we're going to be encasing the ends right away. So you're going to start with your main zipper casings, and you're going to fold these shorter edges to the wrong side so the edges meet in the middle. And you can take this over to your iron and give it a press if you're using cotton or canvas. Cork fabric you can iron as well, but it doesn't hold a fold very well, so I'm just going to finger press mine. Then you're going to fold it in half again, so that way those raw edges are encased in the middle, and you're going to match those folded edges. So now your piece should measure 1.5 inches high and 3/4 inch wide. So we're going to slightly open up the casing so we can tuck in the raw end of our zipper. And you'll want the raw end to be tight up against that folded edge. So basically we're sandwiching the zipper tape in between the casing, so that way our raw edge is closed up. And you'll take a wonder clip and clip together. And then we'll add the casing to the other side of our zipper the same way. And then we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and top stitch 1/8 inch seam allowance to encase the zipper tape. So now you can take a scissors and trim the casing so it's even with the edge of the zipper tape on all sides. And if you measure from each end of the casing, your entire zipper should measure either 7.5 to up to 8 inches. And that just depends on the thickness of the material and how tight you had the raw end of your zipper tape against the folded edge. So if your zipper ends up being longer than 8 inches, you'll have to seam rip one of the casings, trim your zipper a little bit, and then add the casing back on again. So we want to make sure that the project comes together as it should, so just make sure that it measures between 7.5 to 8 inches long. Next, we're going to prepare the lining for each of our pockets. Start by taking pocket A and one of your 12-inch or longer zippers. The reason why the zipper is 12 inches or longer is so that way we can take the zipper pull and slide it nearly to the end of the zipper tape. And that way the pull stays out of the way as we sew. So we don't have to ever worry about moving the zipper pull out of the way. So this technique is really great if you're new to using zipper by the yard or zippers in general. So first you're going to take your zipper and you're going to have your fabric both right sides face up, and you're going to place your zipper on the top edge of the pocket. So make sure that those top raw edges are aligned. You can have a little bit of zipper tape extending beyond both sides, and make sure that your zipper pull closes towards the left side. So this is if you're a right-handed person, you'll want the pull to close to the left. If you're a left-handed person, then you'll flip the zipper around and make sure that all of your zipper pulls close to the right. So let me repeat again. So I'm right-handed, so you want to make sure your zipper pull closes to the left because we open it to the right. So either way, make sure that you always keep your zipper pulls the direction that you need them to go. So I'm going to add a few wonder clips to hold this in place. And then we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and baste the zipper in place with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now you're going to fold pocket A away from the zipper. So hold onto your zipper and bring it down, and take your pocket A piece and have it go above your zipper. And you can press this over at the iron if you'd like. Then you're going to take this raw edge and you're going to match it with the opposite raw edge of the zipper. So basically you're just folding pocket A in half and matching that opposite raw edge together. Make sure that the side edges are even. You don't want it to be crooked at all. Then we're going to repeat the same step. We're going to top stitch this raw edge of the zipper to pocket A with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So here's what your pocket should look like with the zipper attached, and you'll notice that it's actually a tube. So you're going to take your lining piece and have it go towards the bottom, because we always want our lining to hang to the bottom so we can put things inside the pockets. So just make sure everything is nice and flat, keep the zipper flat, and then pull the lining tight. So it should be like how I have mine. Included with the pattern were some labels. I recommend to cut out the pre-made labels and to pin them to each of your pieces so that way you keep track of them. So this is pocket A that we just created, and you repeat the same steps to prepare pocket B and pocket C. So you can see where those pre-made labels come in handy. Now we're ready to move on to the next step. There's a couple important things to note about this section. You want to make sure to use 3/8 of an inch seam allowance for all of the piecing and 1/8 inch seam allowance for all of the top stitching. Also, you might want to use a zipper foot for all of the following steps. It'll be a little bit easier. You want to make sure that your zipper pulls are always closed to the left, or if you're left-handed, make sure your pulls are always closed to the right side. So either way, just keep track of those zipper pulls to make sure they're always closed to the same side no matter which handedness you are. And lastly, you'll want to make sure that the lining for each of your pockets is always down out of the way. You don't want it to get caught in the area that you're sewing, so just make sure that you always move that out of the way. So we're going to start with our front top panel and pocket A. So you can keep that pre-made label attached to the top panel if you'd like, or what I did is on the back side I wrote top. So this will just help make sure that you keep your project oriented the right way, but you'll want to make sure that you mark whichever piece is the top, so you always have it correct. So you're going to take the top panel and place it right sides together with your zipper. You're going to line up the side edges on both sides and also that top raw edge. And we're going to sew the top panel to the zipper along this long edge with 3/8 inch seam allowance. Next, you're going to press the top panel away from the zipper, and you can iron this, but again, I'm just going to finger press mine, and then we'll do our top stitching 1/8 inch from the seam on your fabric. Now you're going to take your pocket A and fold it up out of the way and just make sure it's tight. Then you're going to take your front middle piece and you're going to place it right sides together with that lower raw edge of the zipper. And make sure those side edges are even, and we'll sew the raw edges together along the long edge again. And after you have that sewn together, you're going to fold it down, press it down out of the way, and you'll top stitch with 1/8 inch along the seam. So here's what your project should look like so far. Now we're going to attach pocket B. So take your pocket B piece and make sure that the pulls are on the same side again. And you're going to place your pocket right sides together with the bottom edge of the middle panel. So make sure your side edges stay even. You're going to sew it together here, and then you're going to press pocket B away from the seam, and you'll do your top stitching along that edge. So just make sure that your lining always stays out of the way. Next, you're going to make sure both of the linings are folded up out of the way, and you're going to take your front bottom panel and you're going to place it right sides together with that lower edge of the zipper for pocket B. Again, make sure the side edges are aligned. You'll sew together with 3/8 inch seam allowance. After that, you'll fold the bottom panel away from the zipper. You'll press this and then do your top stitching 1/8 inch seam from the seam that you just made. Now you're going to fold both of the pockets down, and I'm going to turn this over to the lining side so you can see. You want to make sure that they're flat and tight. Next, you're going to slide the zipper pulls inside the bag, and then you're going to sew on each of the side edges with 1/8 inch seam allowance, and that'll keep your lining pockets in place. And then you'll also want to backstitch over the ends of the zipper to prevent your zipper pull from coming off, and you can do that on both sides. And after you have that stitching done on both sides, you can trim off the excess zipper tape so it's even with the raw edges of your fabric. So as you can see, our project is already coming together. So next you're going to take a round object such as a spool of thread and position it in one of the bottom corners of the front. And you're going to trace the outer edge of the object. So here's what it'll look like. So you'd have that curved edge traced right in the corner. And then you're going to do the same thing for the opposite side. Then you're going to take scissors and you're going to cut along that marked line. So we'll round the bottom corners of the bag. So then you can set the front aside and we'll work on assembling the back. We're going to follow almost the exact same steps for the back, but it's going to be a little bit easier because there's less pieces. So you're going to start with the back top and pocket C. Make sure that your zipper pull is on the same side as you've had it this entire time. You're going to take the back panel and mark the top. You can either use the label or, like I did, just mark top on the back side. And you're going to place the back top piece right sides together with pocket C zipper. And you're going to sew with 3/8 inch seam allowance along the top edge, fold it away from the zipper, and top stitch 1/8 inch from the seam. Next, you're going to fold the lining of pocket C up out of the way and take the back bottom piece. You're going to place it right sides together with the bottom edge of pocket C. And you're going to sew with 3/8 inch seam allowance, fold it away from the zipper, and top stitch with 1/8 inch seam allowance from the seam. Next, you're going to fold the pocket lining down. Make sure it's nice and tight. You'll zip the zipper pull inside the bag. And then just like before, you're going to top stitch each of the sides with 1/8 inch seam allowance, and that'll keep the lining in place and prevent the pull from coming off the ends. Now we can trim off the extra zipper tape on both sides. And then we're going to round the bottom corners of the bag just like before. So take the spool of thread and position it in the bottom corner. And again, I just trace that outer edge. Now I'm going to cut along that marked line to round the bottom corners. Next, I'm going to show you how to attach the strap connectors. There's two different options for strap connectors. In the instructions, I've included metal strap connectors and then also fabric strap connectors. I'll first go over how to add the mini metal strap connectors. So this is what they look like. There's screws on the back side, so they're just going to screw in to each side. So there's a set of 2, and you put one on the left and one on the right, and this is what you clip your crossbody strap to. So I like using the metal strap connectors because they're very strong and they look a little bit more professional. And also they don't add any additional bulk to your side seams. However, if that fancy hardware isn't for you and you have some fabric that you want to use, we can make fabric connectors. So I'm just going to use the same fabric that we've been using. And then you'll also need a set of D-rings. You'll need 2 1/2-inch D-rings. So I'll show you both methods. So if you're going to install the mini metal strap connectors, you're going to start by measuring 1 inch in from each of the side edges and mark a vertical line. And then you're going to measure a 1/2 inch up from that folded edge where you had the seam attaching the back top and the zipper together. So just measure up a 1/2 inch and mark a horizontal line on both sides. And you're going to position 1 strap connector on each side of the bag. So that way the side edge is even with that vertical mark, and then the pointed tip of the hardware is even with the horizontal line. So you're going to want to unscrew the washer and use the washer as a template to mark the placement for the screw holes. And then you'll punch the screw holes through your fabric. You'll add the hardware on the front, and then on the back side you'll add the washer. And since this is a thin material, I'd recommend to add another piece of stabilizer. You could use a scrap of foam or fleece batting, Craftex or firm stabilizer, just anything that has a little bit of thickness and cushion to it. You'll add that first, and then you'll place the washer over the back and screw it in place. So that way it just makes sure that your hardware has a nice tight fit and doesn't wiggle around and isn't loose on the back of your bag. So I have a full tutorial on YouTube how to install this hardware if you're interested. So just go to our YouTube channel and I'll explain step by step how to install the mini decorative strap connectors. If we're going to make the fabric connectors, you're going to also add one on each side of the bag. So you're going to take your strap connectors piece and you're going to fold both of the long edges to the center. So you're going to fold it wrong sides together and match those raw edges in the center. And you're going to top stitch each edge with an 1/8 inch seam allowance all the way down the entire length of the strap connector. And you can use some wonder clips to hold the folds together. You could use some tape, whatever you would like, but I'm just going to hold it as I sew and do my top stitching that way. So here's what your connector piece should look like after top stitching. So then you're going to fold the connector in half and match those short edges, and then cut along the folds to separate it into two pieces. So you'll have one piece for each side of the bag. Then you're going to take a D-ring and you're going to thread one connector through the D-ring and fold it so the wrong sides are together. And the wrong sides have that raw center edge. So make sure those wrong sides are together. And I'm going to use a Wonder Clip to hold it in place. And then you'll repeat for the other connector and D-ring. So then you're going to position your connector 3/4 of an inch down from the top edge along the side. So I'm going to measure 3/4 of an inch down. And then you'll also want the raw end of the connector to extend about 1/4 inch beyond your fabric. So that'll just help reinforce that area and prevent it from pulling out of the seam allowance. And I'm just going to re-clip it in place. Then you'll take this over to your sewing machine and you'll baste it in place 1/8 inch from the side edge of your bag. And you'll do that for both connectors. So now we have the front and the back of our bag completely assembled. One last thing before we move on to the next step. You'll want to line up the top edges and double check that the bottom edges are the same length. Depending on what type of zipper that you used, the front and the back might be a different length. It just depends on seam allowance and the width of your zipper tape. So if one's a little bit longer than the other, it's completely normal. You'll just want to trim it up a little bit and make sure that you have those curved edges the same as before. Now we're ready to assemble the bag. So you're going to start by taking both of your lining pieces. And if you would like, you could add a handmade label on one of your lining pieces. So either you could use a metal label or you could print out a label yourself and you'll center it 1.5 inches down from the top edge of one lining piece. So we offer a variety of handmade labels. Right now we have 2 fonts. There's a script and a serif font. And each font comes in 5 different colors, so you could match to whatever hardware you're using. So that's kind of fun. You could just add it on the inside of your bag or even to the outside of your bag if you wanted. So first we're going to round both bottom corners of each lining piece, and it'll be the same steps as we did for the outside. So you're going to take a spool of thread or whatever round object that you used and position it in the bottom corner. Trace the outer edge and then we'll cut along that marked line that we just made. And you'll also want to double check before doing this that the width is 9 inches and your height will be a little bit shorter. So your bag should be wider than it is tall. So just double check that you have your lining pieces oriented before you start doing the corners. So you can set these pieces aside for now. Then you're going to take the front of your bag and your main zipper that has the zipper tabs on the end. And you're going to place the main zipper right sides together with the front. And you're going to center it along the top edge. So if it's a little bit easier for you, if you'd like, you could fold the zipper in half and mark the center point, and then also fold the front in half and mark where the center is. But I'm just going to eyeball it. And then also you'll want to make sure that your zipper pull closes in whatever direction that all the rest of your zipper pulls close. So then you're going to place it right sides together. And I'm going to add a few Wonder Clips to hold it in place. And you'll notice that there's about 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch from the side edge of your bag to the zipper casing. And that's for a reason. So it'll stay out of the seam allowance and it won't get bunched up in the seam allowance. So you're going to sew just across the top edge of the zipper with a 1/4 inch seam just to baste it in place. Then you're going to take one piece of your lining and layer it on top of the front and the main zipper with right sides together. So you'll have the right side of your exterior fabric and the lining right sides together. Make sure you line all of the edges, especially the top edge and the side edges here, and clip them together. And you're going to sew the lining in place with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance across the top. You might have to unzip the zipper pull as you sew and move it out of the way. Then you're going to fold the lining and the front away from the zipper so the zipper is along the top edge of the bag. And you can press this either with your iron or finger press it, and you're going to top stitch along the seam with 1/8 inch seam allowance. Now you're going to take the back side of your bag, and I recommend to tape the D-rings down so that way they don't accidentally flip over into the side seam allowance or the top seam allowance later on. So I'm going to use a little bit of paper tape, and you can sew through this tape. It tears really easily, and once you're done sewing, it'll just tear away from the seam and it won't rip out your stitches. So just tape down each of the D-rings so they stay out of the way. Then we're going to repeat the same process. So you're going to match that main zipper right sides together with the back along the top edge. And again, you can fold it in half to find the centers. I'm just going to eyeball it again. And really, it should be centered if your side edges are even. So make sure that your side edges are even, and it should be about centered. So you're going to baste this down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance just along the zipper. And then you'll take the remaining piece of your lining and layer it over the back side of the zipper, and your lining should be right sides together. And then you'll sew together along the entire top edge with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then you're going to fold away the lining and the back away from the zipper. And I had opened my zipper so that way I could sew past it. I'm just going to close it again. And then you're going to top stitch an 1/8 inch from the seam that you just made. Make sure that your pocket zippers are about in the center, and then you'll also want to make sure that your main zipper is unzipped about halfway. Then you're going to take your front and your back pieces, and you're going to place them right sides together. And you'll do the same for the lining pieces. So I'm just going to take this lining piece and slide it over to match it with the other lining piece. So now we'll have our main fabrics together and our lining fabrics together. And we're going to line up the sides and the bottom edges and clip them in place. And then for the lining, we'll do the same. Now we're ready to sew it together. So for this step, I would highly recommend using a zipper foot. So that way, when you sew past the zipper casing, you can maintain your seam allowance. But you're going to start somewhere on the bottom edge of the lining, and you're going to start with 5/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch, and you continue on the lining. As you get closer to the main fabric, you're going to gradually decrease your seam allowance to 1/4 inch. And you'll continue sewing on the main fabric with 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. And then once you reach the lining again, you'll gradually increase back to 5/8 inch seam allowance. Then once you reach the bottom edge again, you're going to stop sewing so that way you leave about 4 inches on this bottom edge unsewn. And that will be the opening for turning our bag right side out. So having a little bit wider of a seam allowance on the lining pieces means that the lining will be just slightly smaller, so that way it'll fit better inside our bag and it won't be loose and saggy inside the bag. There won't be a lot of extra fabric. All right, so let's get started. Look on both sides of your bag and double check that you caught all of the layers. Then we're going to trim the seam allowance of the lining to about 1/4 of an inch. Do not trim any of the seam allowance from the unsewn area. It'll be easier to sew that hole closed with a full seam allowance. And just make some small little snips along each of the corners, and that'll help relax the corners and help them lay flatter when we turn it right side out. And you'll do that for all 4 corners. So now we can turn the bag right side out through that turning opening. And now we can remove the tape from the D-rings. So you'll just work through the bag and roll the seams, push out the corners, and before you tuck the lining down inside the bag, you're going to fold that seam allowance inside the turning opening, and you can hand sew the turning opening closed, or you can just take this over to your sewing machine and top stitch that closed with 1/8 inch seam allowance. After you do that, then you can tuck the lining inside the bag and arrange it inside, and we'll move on to make the crossbody strap. We have 2 long pieces of fabric that we need to join together to make one long strap. So you're going to take one of the strap pieces and place it right sides together with the other, and you're going to place them perpendicular to each other. And you'll want each end of the strap to overhang about 1/4 of an inch. Then you're going to sew a diagonal line connecting the 2 pieces, starting in the upper left corner and sewing down to the lower right corner. Then you're going to take a scissors and trim the excess seam allowance so it's about 1/4 inch wide. And you can also trim off those tail ends so they're even with each end of the strap. And then you can finger press the seam open, and you'll top stitch 1/8 of an inch from each side of the seam allowance. And this will help hold the cork fabric flat, or whatever fabric you're using flat. It'll add a little bit of decoration to the front and help reduce some of the bulk since it'll compress the fabric. If you're using cotton fabric for your strap, at this point you're going to want to center and fuse the interfacing to the wrong side. You'll want to leave 1/2 of an inch on each of the short ends uninterfaced, so 1/2 inch here won't have any interfacing, and you'll fuse the interfacing along the entire length of the strap. If you need to, you can overlap the interfacing by 1/4 of an inch to meet the required length. So if your piece runs short, you can overlap it 1/4 of an inch and then continue by fusing another piece of interfacing. And you'll just fuse it right over this joint so everything lays flat. I'm using cork fabric, so you don't need to use any interfacing at all. One other point for the cotton. So after you have your interfacing fused, you're going to fold each of the short ends 1/2 inch to the wrong side, and you'll press that. And then you're going to press each of the long edges to meet in the middle. And you'll do this over at the iron. And you'll press that along the entire length of the strap. Then you're going to fold the strap in half one more time to enclose those raw edges. and you can pin or use some wonder clips to hold the folds along the entire length. Now, I cut my piece of cork fabric the width of the cotton fabric, so I don't need to press that 1/2 inch under at the beginning because you can leave cork fabric raw. So for my strap, I'm just going to fold the length sides to the center and then fold it in half again, and then I'm going to top stitch along the entire length. If you cut your strap according to the instructions for the cork fabric, so your strap would be 1 inch wide, then you can just simply fold the strap in half and top stitch along each of the edges with 1/8 of an inch to hold it in place. So with the Pro Light cork, you can use either method, either just folding it in half, or you can fold the length sides to the center and then fold it in half again. It's up to you how much cork you're working with and the look that you're going for. So I'm going to go ahead and take this over to my sewing machine and top stitch the entire strap. Next, you're going to take one end of your strap and the slider buckle, and you're going to thread it through the buckle from the underside, going over that center bar and back down. And you'll want the raw end to be about 1 inch from the fold. So just enough room for you to do your top stitching. So then you'll take this over to the sewing machine and you'll top stitch that raw end to itself with 1/8 inch seam allowance. So here's what it'll look like after top stitching. So now the side with the raw end is considered the wrong side. So take your thumb and keep it on the wrong side to make sure your strap isn't twisted. And on the opposite end, you're going to take one of your swivel hooks with the hook side down, and you're going to thread the raw end through the hook, and then you're going to slide the hook closer to the slider buckle. So they're about that far apart. So just double check that you have the wrong side face up and the hook towards the bottom. Then you're going to take your thumb to keep it on the wrong side and make sure that your strap isn't twisted. Then you're going to take this end of the strap and thread it back through the slider buckle. Then we'll go over that center bar again and back down. So just double check that your strap didn't get twisted at all. Okay, so now my thumb is on the top side of the strap. And you're going to take your other swivel hook, and this time you're going to have the hook on the up side on the top, and you're going to thread it through, and then you're going to fold the strap back onto itself, and you'll top stitch it in place with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then you can attach each end of your swivel hook to each D-ring or each of the metal strap connectors, and your bag is ready to use.